Thank you for joining. Today's we're looking at Unit 6.2, Project Management, Lecture 4. And I guess this will be the last lecture for project management. Right. What do we want to achieve today? Right. Our main objectives for this lecture is for us to be at cover learning outcome 3 and 4. Right. If you look at learning outcome 4, we've got 3 assessment criteria that we need to meet. And learning outcome 5 has got 2 assessment criteria, 5.1 and 5.2. So at the end of this lecture, we should be able to identify issues and risks that may impede a project, design the systems for monitoring and appraising the status of a project. We should be able to design control system to detect and manage issues arising in the course of the project, and to identify issues and risks likely to be encountered in the final stages of a project. And finally, to assess the necessary project task to be completed in the final stages of the project. So let's go on straight to learning assessment criteria 1, which is the 4.1, trying to identify issues and risks that may impede a project. Now, for any project, there are likely to be issues and possible risks that may either prolong the time frame for the project or may cause the project to delay or sometime for the project to be abandoned, because it's not all projects that start that actually complete. Right. So the first bit I'm going to look at is a term called project creep. Project creep. You've got project creep. You've got gaps in the scope or accountability of the project, changing dependencies, on the other hand, other project or business conditions, delays, planning errors, skills, or other resource deficits are all issues that are likely to impede the project. Right. So the first one is project creep. Project creep refers to how a project requirement tend to increase over a project life cycle. For example, what once started out as a single deliverable becomes 5 projects. What that means is that initially we might end up saying that we're going to, let's say, for example, build a 2-story building. That will be our initial plan for a project. However, within the course of the project, we might find it necessary to increase it from 2 stories to 4 stories. This is going to cause the requirement of the project to increase, because initially the foundation of the project was meant for 2 stories. So if we want to make it a 4 stories, then it means that we need to solidify the base or the foundation of the project, and this is going to cause the project to delay because the requirement has increased from what we initially intended. If it's a road construction, if the thickness of the asphalt on the road is going to be 2 inches, which is planned initially, and then in the course of the project, if the sponsors decide that the asphalt thickness should go up into 5 inches, this means that the requirement of the project has changed, and this is going to pull the project back. Right. So project creep refers to how a project requirement tends to increase over time within the project life cycle. Right. So that is what we mean by project creep. So project creep is one of issues and risks that are likely to impede a project. Apart from the project creep, we have gaps in the scope or accountability of the project. That means that in terms of accountability, people are not actually responsible in terms of what has been assigned to them. Right. So such issues are also likely to impede the project if people don't know their job role and their responsibilities. At the same time, if there are gaps in the scope and you're not quite sure how big or small the project should be, that is also likely to cause confusion and then cause the project to delay. We've also got changing dependencies in terms of other project and business conditions. Often we have a lot of projects running parallel to each other. So all projects are competing for the same time and resources. So other project dependencies are also likely to cause project to delay. And then we also have what is called business conditions. Business conditions, the economic climate might change in terms of inflation, in terms of price of materials and resources. All these things may change because they are not something that can be predetermined. So they may change and they also cause the project to delay. Right. We recently know the HS2 project, a rail project in the UK. They've budgeted, right? But then within the next 5 years, nobody knows the business conditions that may come out as a result of inflation or maybe as a result of Britain leaving the EU Brexit and how these things is going to impact on the HS2 project. So those are all business conditions that may change. And then we have delays that are also likely. Most projects face a lot of delays. A 5-year project may end up finishing within 7 years. And that will all be caused by either project creep, gaps in the scope and accountability, or changing business dependencies. And then another crucial issue that actually impacts upon that impede project are planning errors. In fact, there's a saying that if we fail to plan properly, then we are planning to fail. Often, within the planning of the project, there are so many errors that are often identified in the middle of the project. So such planning errors initially are likely to pose as risk as the project unfolds. And then finally, we've got issues such as skills and resource deficit, which are also risk that may likely impede a project. We might have skills that are not fit for the role that has been assigned to. If you don't have the competent skills to do your job, it will end up impeding the project. Also, we might have resource deficit, shortage of materials, resources. At a point in time, you might use up all your resources, and if you're not planning it very well to replenish it or to find to outsource the resources, you might end up having a project delay. So these are all issues and risks that are possible to impede a project. Right. So we've spoken about project creep. Now let's look at how to manage project scope to avoid a creep. We need to monitor the project status and baseline scope. When we say baseline scope, initial stage of the project, we've chosen our scope, meaning how big the project may be, how extensive the project may be. That serves as a baseline. So as the project starts, we always have to compare our scope with the status, right? So you only have to look at the existing state of the project, compare it with the baseline to see if there are any differences in scope, right? So if we want to avoid creep in the project, we have to constantly monitor the status of the project, compare it with the baseline scope, and see if there is any difference. If we're able to do that regularly, then we'll be able to avoid any creep in the project. Again, there's the need to compare actual work performance measurement with the baseline scope using variance analysis. That is, how different is the current project from the original plan. When we talk about variance analysis, it's simply the observed as against the expected. The observed as against the expected. So if we are planning to maybe finish a 2-story building or a 10-kilometer road construction, maybe we are expected to finish it within 5 months. We need to be able to compare current work performance to see if we will be able to meet that target. If we are not, then we are likely to enter into project creep. So we always have to look at what is going on the ground. If we have got a 5-year project, we can look at how far we've gone within a year and look at the 4 extra years, look at the job that we are required to do, and to see whether we'll be able to meet the target. Right. That is how we can try to avoid creep or manage creep, by comparing the actual work performance as against baseline scope, and any difference with what is called the variance. Again, if we want to manage project scope to avoid creep, we have to be able to determine the cause and the degree of the changes found. We always have to determine the cause and the degree of any changes found in terms of our variance. Again, deciding on change request, whether corrective or preventive action is needed. When we say project change request, it simply means that if you want to make any changes in the project, you have to formally write a letter requesting for that change. And you have to ask yourself whether that change is meant to serve as a corrective measure or a preventive action. Those are things that you need to think about. Are you going to change something to correct an anomaly or to prevent something from happening? You need to decide on that. If we are able to decide on the change request appropriately, we will be able to avoid creep. Again, managing all change requests and recommended actions, whether corrective or preventive, via the performance integrated change control process. So if you want to make any change, you should be able to go through all the stakeholders and make sure that all change requests and recommended action, whether corrective or preventive, has been passed through the performance integrated change control process to make sure that there is no mistake. And if approved, if the change request is approved as to whether the request affect the project overall scope and the cost, which is the baseline, then the scope statement, work breakdown structure, or cost baseline is updated and sent out to stakeholders. In short, all changes are processed, documented, and communicated properly to all stakeholders. We have to remember, in project, we have what is called the work breakdown structure. So you know what is going to be done at every phase of the project. And once a change request comes in, then the work breakdown structure is going to be affected. So a note has been taken, and make sure that if approved change requests affect the project overall scope and cost baseline, then the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and or the cost baseline is updated. So if you have broken down the project into different phases, then once you put in any change request and the change request is approved, that work breakdown structure needs to be updated, and all stakeholders must be informed. And those are how we'll be able to manage the scope to avoid creep. All right, let's look at project monitoring. You should be able to design systems for monitoring and appraising the status of a project. So if you look at project monitoring, we have status and plan documentation and regular monitoring. Status and plan documentation and regular monitoring meetings. Any project that needs to succeed, there should be constant monitoring and appraisal of the status of the project. And that will be able to tell us whether we are going to plan or not. So we need to refine your project as you go along so that evaluation is part of your regular project activities. Evaluate the project at agreed milestone, for example, on a yearly basis or after a major activities, and carry out an initial baseline exercise against which you compare progress at the end of the project. So in the first place, there is a need for us to refine our project as we go along, so that evaluation is part of our regular project activities. If you don't monitor the project and evaluate it as you go along, and you want to wait at an agreed time scale, then you might begin to see that the project might not run according to plan. So if you want to monitor your project, then the best thing is to make the monitoring and evaluation as part of daily routine, right? And you need to evaluate the project also at an agreed time, agreed milestone. Apart from the fact that evaluation is built into daily activities, you also have to agree particular milestones that you need to assess the progress of the project. Now, especially in construction sector, every morning, all the laborers, the line managers, and the rest will have an assembly, have a meeting, and they brief them on what needs to be done for the day. If there are anything that were likely impacting on the progress in the previous day, they'll be briefed and precautionary measures are taken. So this means that every day the project will be monitored and evaluated so that they will be able to make sure that the right thing is done. That doesn't mean that the agreed milestone for evaluation is not also going to be done. Apart from the daily one, they will also schedule either monthly or weekly meetings where they are going to evaluate the project against agreed milestone to see if they are on target. And there's a need to carry out initial baseline exercise against which we can compare progress at the end of the project. Because we have got our own baseline of what we want to achieve, that is going to serve as a yardstick for us to be able to compare progress that we have made at the end of the project. So that is one way of monitoring and appraising the status of the project, regular meetings and evaluation. Apart from that, there's a need to define responsibilities and accountabilities. One of the best ways of monitoring and appraising is defining responsibilities and accountabilities so that everybody is responsible for a particular part of the project, so that if there's any failure, you have someone to fall on to ask why things didn't go as expected. What is accountability? Apart from that, one of the best ways of monitoring and appraising is communication. Right? There's a need for the communication flow within the organization so that all sectors of the project will link up to each other. And that is the best way that you can find out if things are going wrong or right, whether you are on target or not. There's a need for communication. And another issue is traceability. Once we've been able to define responsibilities and accountabilities, then when something doesn't go right, you can trace who is responsible, where the mistake came from, and then we'll be able to address it. And my typical example of traceability is the triage system that is currently being used in the hospitals. You've got the receptionist who will take your details, write few notes about your problems when you arrive at accident and emergency. And then you have to sit down there and the nurse will come and ask you the same question and tick all the boxes before you will have the chance to see the consultant who will also go through the same question and tick all the boxes. Why are they doing that? They are doing that to avoid any mistake in terms of the services that is going to be delivered to the patient. So if anything goes wrong, they can fall back on the information from the receptionist, from the nurse, and the consultant, and trace out whose fault is it. Right, so traceability is very, very important in project management. And that is the best way of monitoring, so that you will be able to trace where any fault came from. And then you also need to follow the formalized framework and stages within the project. And that is another way that we'll be able to monitor. So a designing system for monitoring and appraising the status of the project will encompass all the points raised below. Right, let's look at the next slide. How do we design control system to detect and manage issues arising in the course of the project? Design control systems to detect and manage issues arising in the course of the project. One of the issues that we have to look at is project conflict resolution. Project conflict resolution. And the methods are confronting issues, compromising issues, smoothing issues, forcing issues, and avoiding. Right. If you want to resolve a conflict, there are so many approaches. You can confront straight away. If it's a project, if there are issues that need to be resolved, you can confront it squarely, say whose fault is it, where the problem came from, and address it once and for all. That's one method. You can also decide to compromise, trying to meet the opposing group midway to make sure there wouldn't be any tension within the project team, so that you'll be able to resolve the conflict amicably by compromising, meeting each side halfway. This is similar to the smoothing method to make sure the conflict is resolved smoothly without impacting on any other party. Forcing is imposing solution to the problem. That is a very strict way of going about issues to make sure that you are able to resolve the conflict by force. But this depends on the situation. And avoiding, that is the last method, pretending that nothing has happened and make sure you observe things and see if such conflict will be resolved naturally. Whichever method that you're going to use, the role of the project manager and the sponsor is very, very, very important. And one of the skills by the project manager is to make sure that you'll be able to detect and manage issues arising from the core of the project and resolve any conflict. Right. The conflict could be either constructive or destructive. Not all conflicts are destructive. Some conflict comes in to be able to make things work better. So we don't have to see conflict as destructive. It can also be constructive. And there should always be a compromise when we intend to resolve issues. Okay, again, we have skills complementaries, where different skills from different sectors of the project can come in to complement each other to be able to resolve issues without any problem. And then whatever issues are meant to be solved, whatever conflict, there's the need for goal congruence in terms of consistency or agreement of individual goals with the company goals. We know the company goals, what we want to achieve within the project. We also have individual goals. We have to make sure that those two will come together if we will be able to solve any project. If you want to depend on company goals only or individual goals only, then we wouldn't be able to solve any conflict within an organization. We have to make sure that our personal goal, our personal ambition objectives will be tied with the company goals. Right, let's go to the next slide. Issues and risks likely to be encountered in the final stages of a project. The final stage of a project is what is called project closeout. Project closeout. You want to close the project. Project closeout phase. This is a phase that so many things can come in. So we need to be able to identify issues and risks that are likely to be encountered in the final stages of a project or the project closeout phase. Now, closeout begins when the program concludes through completion of key performance parameters that the project has met the goals established. If we take an example of the assignment that we are asked to complete, moving from Central London to Oxford, the project closeout phase will be when we finally got to Banbury in Oxfordshire in our new office. We've got the office, everything is set. We'll be able to move all things in Oxford. Then we have entered into what? The close out phase. Because if you finish the project, you have to close it and hand the project over to the sponsors. And you have to make sure that all key performance parameters have been met. All the goals and the standard that you set for the project has been completed. And in that case, you hand the project over to the sponsor. That is the project closeout phase. It begins when the program concludes through completion of key performance indicators. What are the issues and risks that are likely to be encountered in the final stages or the closeout phase? Let's look at project closeout risk. In the final stages of any project, there is often what seems to be lack of ownership. People are so complacent, they've been in the project for a long time, and nobody knows who is responsible for what. And there are often communication failures, who to talk to, and then meaningless plan without buy-in, possible risk at the end of the project. You need to get all the stakeholders together for any plan that is taken, so that once they all buy in, and then you can complete the project successfully. In the close-up phase, one of the risks is no accountability. People are so complacent, they've been in the project for a long time, and people don't know who is to do this and who is to do what. And lack of employee empowerment. At the close-out phase, there's the need to empower all the employees. Right. Let's look at how to assess the necessary project tasks to be completed in the final stages of the project. The close-up phase. There should be a checklist to be able to tick that everything has been completed. All that was assigned to you has been done and achieved. This is the project close-out phase. There should be formal evaluation of the project and the team performance. Evaluate the project from the beginning to the end. What went very well? What were the problems that you faced? How did you overcome such project? What was the performance of every single team member on the project? That is a formal evaluation of the project. Document learning points for the future. You have to make sure that any lessons that was learned from this project, be it failure or new skills that gains, any lessons learned will be documented. Why? Because this is going to be used for subsequent projects, and that is the best way that a project manager will be able to improve upon project skills as we move on from one project to another, because we try to learn from one project, document all things that we learn from the project so that it will be used for subsequent project. And then we assess the success factor. Check everything, every checkbox, and see whether you were able to successfully finish the project. And then you have to write your report, post-implementation report. After that, you sign off on deliverables. Every target that you set yourself within the course of the project, at every phase of the project, make a checklist. Make sure everything was achieved, and then sign off. Having signed off, you have to hand over the project and then archive all documentation. And then we have contract closures. You have to sign that the contract is actually closed. It's a formal signing. But before that, there should be closing out financial accounts and reassigning your team. Now, if it's a project and you were given budget, balance your accounts and then make sure if there are any excess funds remaining, you account for every single penny to the project manager. And then it will be handed over to the sponsor. If it's a construction project, let's say of a road or a building, maybe not all the materials were used. You have to account for every material. Any surplus materials are not for you. You need to hand all resources left over back to the sponsor. So in the final close-out stage, you need to close out any financial accounts, and then you can reassign your team to another project. Right. That is the end of our lecture. I hope you find it quite useful. Go on straight to the assignment brief and look at how the lectures fit in. The presentation were made in such a way that learning outcome 1 will be presentation 1, learning outcome 2, presentation 2. So go from lecture 1 up to lecture 4, and you will be able to answer all the tasks given in the assignment. Right. We will meet again and then go over the assignment finally. And if you have any problem in the interim, don't hesitate to contact me so that we'll be able to discuss it. I've sent sample brief. Yes, the sample brief is all about construction of a canteen. It's not the movement of office, but it will give you a guide as to how to set out and arrange your assignment in order. Thank you very much. And if you have any problem, please email me first, and then I'll be able to respond. and then we can take it from there. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks.